Gemini, impossible not to cry. The pact was broken. Something in your soul has felt out of place for a long time. You couldn't name it. You couldn't explain it. But you felt it, like a quiet ache beneath the surface, a heaviness that lingered even in moments of joy. As if somewhere, somehow, a part of you had been holding onto a silent grief. A promise unkept. A wound left unspoken. Today, you'll understand why. Because there was a sacred pact, a soul agreement you once made. Not with a person, but with the universe itself. A pact built on the belief that if you were honest, generous, flexible, and endlessly understanding, you would be protected. That if you offered your light without expectation, it would naturally return to you in balance, in love, in care. But Gemini, that pact was broken. And not by you. The tears rising now, they're not just sadness. They're recognition. Your soul remembers the moment it started to give more than it received. The moment you began to be used not for who you are, but for the peace, the clarity, the emotional stability you so effortlessly offer others. No more pretending that this hasn't cost you. You've been carrying the weight of broken promises, emotional inequity, and unseen efforts for too long. And now, the truth is ready to meet you. Not to break you, but to free you. If these words are awakening something inside you, if a part of you is already crying without knowing why, stay with me. This message is not to wound you, but to guide you home. Back to your power. Back to your truth. Back to the version of you who never needed to sacrifice your soul just to be safe. Like this video if it resonates. Share your story in the comments. Your voice may be the beginning of someone else's healing. Subscribe to continue receiving what your spirit already knows. You are not alone, and you were never meant to carry this pain alone. Gate 1, the false pact. How Gemini was led away from themselves. Gemini, there was a time, not long ago, when you believed that harmony was your responsibility. That if things fell off, it was your job to fix them. That if someone was distant, cold, or overwhelmed, it was your role to adapt, to soothe, to adjust yourself so that peace could return. But the truth you're now awakening to is this. Somewhere along the way, you entered into a false pact, one that asked you to betray yourself in the name of connection. It didn't begin with a grand moment. It began subtly. Maybe it started in childhood, when you were praised for being easygoing, for not making a fuss, for always smiling through discomfort. Maybe it began in a friendship or a relationship where your emotional intelligence made you the safe one, the understanding one, the one who always gives grace. You didn't sign up for this with words. You signed it with your silence, with your willingness to carry more so others could carry less. And slowly, Gemini, you forgot what your needs even sounded like. You became the energetic stabilizer for others, listening, healing, translating emotions that weren't yours to hold. You turned down your light when it made others uncomfortable. You gave answers to questions no one asked you to answer. You kept the peace, not because it was peaceful, but because you were terrified of being seen as too much if you didn't. This was the false pact. If I make myself easier to love, they will stay. If I give without asking for anything in return, the universe will protect me. If I remain emotionally available, even when I'm hurting, I'll finally be chosen. But Gemini, that pact was built on illusion. And you're beginning to see that now. Because even as you gave your best, you still weren't met. Even as you compromised, you still weren't seen. Even as you tried to be the bridge, you were left standing alone on the edge. And now, the toll has caught up to your soul. You've noticed the signs, haven't you? The exhaustion that no amount of sleep can fix. The anxiety before conversations you used to tolerate. The way you've stopped finding joy in things that once lit you up. The vague guilt when you say no, even though you know you should. The pressure to be light and fun when inside you're breaking. These aren't just symptoms of burnout. They're spiritual messages, your soul's way of telling you, Gemini, the pact is broken. And it never truly served you. It hurts, doesn't it? To realize how much of yourself you gave away trying to keep peace that was never yours to maintain. But this hurt is sacred. It is the threshold between forgetting and remembering. Because something in you has refused to fully surrender to this imbalance. Some part of you, the purest part, has been watching quietly all along, waiting for the moment when you'd stop blaming yourself and start questioning the structure. And that moment is now. Gemini, the reason you've attracted so many unbalanced people is not because something is wrong with you. It's because your stability is magnetic to chaos. Your light has drawn in those still trapped in their darkness. And because of your dual nature, your gift for seeing both sides, you've empathized even with those who did not deserve your grace. But this chapter ends here. You are no longer here to carry the emotional burdens of those unwilling to carry their own. You are no longer here to be the one who makes it work at your own expense. You are no longer available for silent suffering disguised as strength. You are waking up. And that awakening begins with this radical truth. Your peace matters as much as anyone else's. No relationship is worth losing yourself. No dynamic is worth silencing your truth. No love is real if it asks you to disappear to sustain it. Let this realization sink in, not to break you, but to finally bring you home to yourself. Gate 2. The cost of carrying what was never yours. Gemini, let's pause for a moment. Not to look away, but to look deeper. What has it truly cost you to keep the peace? Not the peace that nourishes and protects, but the false peace, the one built on silence, self-sacrifice, and invisible weight. The kind of peace where you contort yourself into shapes that no longer resemble who you are. The kind that asks you to smile when you want to scream, to hold space for everyone else while no one notices you're breaking. What has that cost you? For many of you, the price has been your clarity. Your once sharp intuition has been fogged by constant overthinking. You began doubting yourself, wondering if you were too sensitive, too demanding, too much. But Gemini, you were never too much. You were simply surrounded by people who gave you too little. You stopped trusting your needs. You pushed them down. You became what others needed until you lost track of what you needed to feel safe, seen, and whole. It's no wonder, then, that your nervous system is tired. It's no wonder that joy feels foreign, or that creativity no longer flows the way it once did. When you live in a constant state of internal adjustment, monitoring others' moods, anticipating their reactions, minimizing your own truths to maintain external harmony, it fractures your relationship with yourself. And Gemini, you are a being who thrives on self-connection. You are ruled by thought, by ideas, by air, and when your own mind becomes a battlefield, nothing feels like home anymore. This is the cost of the broken pact. Not just emotional depletion, but disconnection from self. You began to identify your worth by your usefulness, your value by how calm you could keep others. And in doing so, you allowed your greatest gift, your adaptable, sparkling presence, to become your greatest wound. But here's what's sacred in all of this. You're not broken, you're awakening. This is not a breakdown. It's a revelation. Because when you start to feel the fatigue, the bitterness, the numbness, it's not failure. It's your inner being finally refusing to participate in a pattern that's killing your light. And that's where everything begins to change. You start noticing who drains you. You feel the physical tension after a phone call. You realize how many of your yes were rooted in fear, not love. You hear the voice of your intuition growing louder, no longer asking politely, but demanding to be heard. And with that comes a sacred anger. Not to destroy, but to cleanse. The kind of anger that says, I am no longer available for uneven exchanges. The kind of clarity that says, I will not apologize for needing peace that includes me. The kind of boundary that says, my energy is not a refuge for those unwilling to create their own. You begin reclaiming pieces of yourself. Not all at once, but moment by moment. You speak a truth you used to swallow. You cancel a meeting that depletes you. You pause before responding and ask yourself, do I even want to engage with this? These are not small actions, Gemini. These are sacred acts of remembrance. Because the truth is, the real you never left. The part of you that was playful, curious, wildly expressive, that part didn't die. It simply went into hiding, waiting for the day when you'd finally feel safe enough to return. That day is now. But to welcome them back, you must release what no longer belongs to you. The guilt, the self-blame, The belief that you are only worthy when you're fixing, translating, or overgiving. You are not here to hold up other people's worlds at the expense of your own. You are here to breathe,
To create.
to express your truth freely. And anyone who asks you to trade that freedom for the illusion of connection is not your person. Let this be the beginning of your energetic rebalancing. Let your nervous system reset. Let your mind come home. Let your heart learn what it feels like to receive without earning, to be held without explaining, to be loved without negotiating the terms. Gemini, you are no longer carrying what was never yours. And that is the most liberating truth of all. Gate 3, the new pact, rewriting your sacred agreement. Gemini, something inside you has shifted, and though it may feel subtle, like the hush before a storm or the breath between heartbeats, you can feel it. You're not reacting the same way anymore. You no longer chase the apologies that never come. You no longer stay in places that echo with silence after you speak your truth. And most of all, you've stopped negotiating the terms of your worth. It didn't happen all at once. It happened slowly, like waking from a long, strange dream. There was a night not long ago, wasn't there? One where you sat alone with your thoughts, staring at your reflection in a dark window. The world outside was quiet, but inside you, a storm, a memory returned of a moment when you were younger, more hopeful, more willing to give everything to someone who only ever met you halfway. You remembered how you smiled through your own sadness just to keep someone else comfortable. You remembered how you bit your tongue so many times it bled, just to avoid conflict, just to hold the peace. And that's when it hit you. This wasn't love. This wasn't balance. This wasn't the agreement your soul came here to keep. The pact you had once lived by, that if you gave enough, loved enough, stayed soft enough, you would be protected, was not a pact you ever should have signed. You didn't agree to betray yourself in the name of connection. You didn't come into this life to be the emotional caretaker of those unwilling to do their own healing. Somewhere along the way, Gemini, the sacred terms were twisted. And you got lost inside the compromise. But now you're awake. This is the moment the new pact begins, not with someone else's permission, but with your own decision. This new agreement is simple. It begins each time you choose not to answer the message that pulls at your guilt. It strengthens each time you choose your peace over their chaos. It deepens each time you remind yourself that love does not require you to abandon yourself. Imagine this. You're in a room full of people, and someone asks you to bend, to adjust, to be less expressive, less curious, less you. And this time, you don't. You smile gently. You stay still. And you say, "No, thank you." That's it. No apology. No explanation. Just a quiet declaration that your light no longer shrinks to fit the dim. The universe watches that moment. And something shifts, because the new pact is not about punishment or walls. It's about clarity. You now understand that the right people won't flinch at your boundaries. They won't demand access to your energy and call it love. They'll meet you where you are. They'll know that your duality isn't something to be fixed, it's something to be honored. The Gemini you are becoming does not beg to stay. They do not barter for space. They do not carry broken stories in the hope of rewriting someone else's ending.
No.
The Gemini you are becoming writes their own ending, one where you no longer confuse being needed with being loved. One where you no longer carry guilt for choosing joy. One where the only approval you seek is the quiet yes from your own soul. This is what the new pact offers you. A life where you feel at home inside yourself. A mind that doesn't race trying to fix everything. A heart that knows it is safe to rest. Relationships where your voice doesn't echo, but resonates. And maybe, just maybe, that little part of you that always hoped for someone to finally understand is beginning to realize the only one who ever needed to understand you was you.
This isn't the end, Gemini.
It's the return, the sacred rewriting of your story. A story where you're no longer the supporting role in someone else's journey. You are the author, the main character, the soul who remembered, after everything, that peace was never meant to cost you your voice. Gate 4, living the new frequency, becoming the guardian of your energy. Gemini, the pact has been rewritten, the old weight laid to rest. But now comes the true test. not of endurance, not of suffering, but of presence. Can you live this new energy? Not just in silence, when you're alone with your healing, but in the noise. In the everyday moments where old patterns might still whisper your name. In the face of a message that once would have unraveled you. In a room where someone still expects the old version of you to show up and save them. Because this is where the real transformation happens. Not in the realization, but in the embodiment. There's a new frequency moving through you now. You feel it, don't you? In the calmness that stays with you even when others panic. In the way you speak your truth now, not louder, but clearer. In the way you're no longer tempted to return to places you had to crawl out of. You've outgrown the need to explain your worth to people committed to misunderstanding you. And while that might feel lonely at times, it is also liberating. You are no longer performing to keep the peace. You are no longer draining yourself to stay in the room. You have learned to leave, not out of fear, but out of reverence for your own energy. This is your sanctuary now. Not a place, not a person, but a frequency. A frequency where you protect your boundaries not with walls, but with wisdom. Where you choose your battles, most of which you no longer need to fight. Where your no is not aggressive, but sacred. Where your silence is not withdrawal, but discernment. There will be tests, Gemini. People from the past may return, drawn to the light you no longer dim. Some will come with apologies, others with distractions. Some will swear they've changed. And maybe they have. But this new version of you is not waiting to be rescued. You're not here to audition for love or beg to be seen. Because you've already seen yourself. And in doing so, you became sovereign. You are no longer holding space for people who shrink your world. Instead, you're building a reality where joy is not a reward, but a birthright. Where you don't need to be chosen to feel valuable. Where your softness is no longer used as a doorway for chaos, but as a filter for who gets to stay. You are the guardian of this new vibration, and with that role comes grace. You will lose people. You will release identities. You will grieve versions of yourself that were built on survival. But you will also gain something that cannot be taken from you, a peace that lives inside your bones. One day, not too far from now, someone will look at you and say, "You've changed." And you will smile, not out of pride, but from the quiet knowing that they are right. You did change. You stopped breaking yourself just to be loved. You stopped carrying burdens that never belonged to you. You stopped shrinking to be understood. And in that change, you came home. Gemini, the world is not always gentle, but you are. And that is your strength. You are the storm and the stillness, the question and the answer. The wanderer, and the one who always finds their way back. This journey was never about becoming someone else. It was always about remembering who you were before the world told you to be anything less. Now you live in your own frequency. You speak your own language. And those who are meant for you will rise to meet it, not because you lowered your vibration, but because you raised it and invited the world to meet you there. This is your new life. Guard it fiercely. Love it gently. And walk forward knowing you are no longer healing to survive. You are healing to create. Conclusion: a sacred return to self. Gemini, if your heart feels quieter now, if your breath feels steadier, if there's a soft warmth rising in your chest as you take in all that has unfolded, then you know this was never just a message. It was a homecoming. You didn't arrive here by accident. You've crossed invisible thresholds through pain, reflection, resilience. And somehow, through all the noise and confusion, you heard your own soul calling you back. You are no longer the version of yourself who had to beg for space or trade your light for proximity. You are no longer the one who mistook attention for love or chaos for passion. You are the one who remembers now, the one who knows. And this knowing, it changes everything. You've learned that love is not something you must earn by being useful. That peace is not a prize reserved for the patient. That truth is not too loud, too sharp, too complicated. It is just real. And that's all it ever needed to be. From this moment forward, you walk as someone reborn. Not into a different person, but into your original self, the one who existed before life taught you to doubt your magic. The one who didn't apologize for being many things at once. The one who spoke in paradoxes and poems. The one who knew that change was not chaos, it was your nature. Gemini, your life is no longer about surviving the noise. It's about curating the symphony, about calling in what matches your rhythm, about standing in the quiet and still feeling whole. So when the world tries to test your light, when someone comes along offering half of what you used to beg for, smile. You don't live there anymore. You are no longer waiting for permission to shine. You are no longer performing peace. You are peace. And if ever you forget, return to these gates. Listen again. Let them guide you back. Not because you're broken, but because you're expanding. Not because you're lost, but because you're evolving. Not because you need fixing, but because you are learning to love your own unfolding. This, dear Gemini, is what it means to come home to yourself. May you never again abandon the beauty of who you are just to be chosen. Because now you choose you, and that is the most sacred choice of all.